nationally. I don't know how effective it will be with a provincial budget to try to build a profile in the UK or in Germany or in China. Quite honestly, I think it will be very difficult. And the question is, where will provincial money and the money from local government be used most effectively? And I think the point that Alan made and that Mike made is absolutely crucial. Domestic tourism, in my view, must be kick-started by provinces not only cooperating, but competing with one another in the domestic market. That will force all of us to up our game. But in the region, I said Africa is very important. But you know, for the foreseeable future, if we look at size of national markets, we will have national offices in, I said, Nigeria, Angola, Kenya. But why is it not possible? I'm actually springing a bit of a surprise on my colleagues here. But why is it not possible that KZN can have an office in Maputo and the Western Cape can have an office in Angola and Gauteng can have an office in Botswana and Zimbabwe and what? Because remember, colleagues, we are taking the regional market for granted. And you know, the trends are going to change. What is happening at the moment? Many of those people come here and they come and they do shopping and they stay with friends and family, and we count them as tourists because they stay longer than a day. But what is happening? South African businesses are opening branches in all of these countries. Woolworths is now there, Checkers is there, Pick n Pay is there, they're building their own malls. So we must know that very shortly we will have to compete for those tourists as we compete for tourists all over the world. And I think that's where provinces have a key role to play.
Well, from where I stand, I must say, Minister, that the approach you are adopting is an approach that KZN have already taken forward, or may not have opened an office, but we have taken a decision that, in fact, we want to have direct connectivity between us and Harare and Zimbabwe. We have taken a decision that we would want to have a direct contact with Zambia and Lusaka. And as we speak right now, from the 6th to the 10th, from the 8th to the 10th of June, we will be in Lusaka. Because part of that is that we want to ensure that we strengthen our presence there and the movement of people that move from Lusaka to us. And since we introduced a direct flight between Durban and Lusaka last year, July, we've been seeing phenomenal figures in terms of growth coming out of that. We have got up at 9 other destinations and capitals in the region that we're eyeing. Our relationship already between ourselves, Swaziland, Mozambique, and we're adding Seychelles in the East route is beginning to pay a dividend. And part of the thing that during Indaba will be having a round of meeting with those ministers together with their marketing agencies in tourism, because we want to strengthen inter-tourism development coming out of those countries so that we also are able then to have our people going to that. But I also want to come back to the other question you raised around the question of inventory. I think there are 3 main important issues around that. The first one is that in the intervening period, it is true what I think my colleague Alan was saying, that we as government, particularly at a provincial level, we are focusing on events. In KwaZulu-Natal, we've done 2 things. We have established a KZN Convention Bureau, and in its existence, that bureau has now been able to get more than 36 events in terms of winning some of the bids to host these events. And we've spread these events throughout the year, so that when we have got the lower seasons, we can be able to ensure that the occupancy rate remains high. Okay. I think on that score, we're going to require to have private sector partnerships to come into the party, because we have to set up what we call the bid fund that allows us to be able to go selectively look for those events so that we can host them successfully. The second part, from where we stand as KwaZulu-Natal with regard to that, we have decided very clearly that we are spending more than 150 million in some of the mega events that we are hosting. So we are now seeing KwaZulu-Natal being a home colleague of mega events in South Africa. And really we are building that reputation from a very well worked out strategy. And for us, we are building on a competitive environment, competitive advantage. We are the only province, Minister, that we can safely say we are summer and forever summer. And we only know of 2 seasons, summer and forever summer. We are in winter now. When you come to KZN, you enjoy the summer environment. So I think the third element is that we definitely need to build volume, to encourage private sector, that where there is this inventory, that they invest, because if we are saying we're eyeing to increase the inbound tourist arrivals in the country as we are growing, Minister, we must also be able to have a corresponding growth in terms of investment. But we can't go that faster than our capacity to be able to attract tourists. So I think we must encourage that during the period when there is low occupancy, our role as government is then to come in the areas where government can invest, which we are doing, and therefore we are simply saying, therefore we need then to strengthen that partnership between private sector and public sector with regard to this.
Okay, now I think from our earlier discussion, we all agreed we had migrated from competitive strategy to cooperative strategy. So I would imagine that's your cooperative strength, not just your competitive strength in terms of your climate. One of the other things that's critically important for us is that we have a highly organized and a highly well-operated, especially hospitality and hotel industry in this country. And our professional skills, be that people like me as consultants or quantity surveyors, architects, management companies, are being sought after on a daily basis out of Africa. You know, I get calls out from as far afield as Kaduna in Nigeria. So we've heard about you through our bankers who have a relationship with bankers in South Africa, and we'd like you to advise us on a project. So we have that, and we are moving into, as the hospitality industry, we are moving into a much wider market, both in terms of initial professionalism and also ongoing operations. So our lessons learned at home are critically important into how we go into these countries. And from that perspective, are there issues between public-private sector partnerships that we can improve in South Africa, that we can then export in terms of our movement and our expedition into regional Africa, both from a national or a provincial level?
The first point you're making about highly organized industry must be taken as a strength. It's very important, because whenever you're dealing with organized sectors, it makes a job for government quite easier. Competitiveness and forever improving on our capabilities as the economy, especially in the tourism sector, is going to be forever important. We have just taken over a hotel school. It's called Garangwa Hotel School as Gauteng Provincial Government, because of the recent redetermination of the provincial boundaries from Northwest. When I was interacting with the principal, he was saying the same thing as saying, that the students who go through the school are highly sought after. Even the ones who are just doing a one-year course, immediately they are taken. I think the partnerships you are talking about with the private sector are going to be very important, including with institutions of learning. And I think as Gauteng Provincial Government, we've gone through these things. The amount of work we have done, for instance, in the Cradle of Humankind and World Heritage Site, is a clear, practical example of working partnerships. We work there with the university, we work with the communities. The university is the University of Witwatersrand. The amount of work with the communities around the Dilaogue, where we've got the Big Five, which is the first of its kind that is owned by a provincial government. It's again a practical example of a working partnership. So government, private sector, the communities always will have to work together, so that you also determine the needs, so that you know exactly what is it that you need to do when, and so that you don't supply wrong things to the market. So I think that partnership is quite very, very important for us to continue to thrive as the sector.
Thank you. Minister Winder?
I think the one area that generally we work very well together is, as the Minister was saying, he hands over some money to South African tourism, which is where the industry comes together on the board level and in those kind of discussions. I think an area that we need to look at, perhaps working a bit more or working better together, is the space around the discussion this morning, the red tape stuff. And we see in the National Development Plan, it also talks about how we reduce red tape, those blockages to the industry, and I think we need to actually find ways to work better in that red tape cutting space. So it was, this morning's discussion was visas, it's, you know, those kind of processes that we're involved in from a government point of view that are really getting in the way, and I think the Minister spoke about it as well, about how we can get it, and we must lead that charge, get this regional visa system going, and let's use the innovation, because that's the second point, and I think we need to work a lot better together around the innovation space. And we've got companies in Africa that are innovating and creating whole new markets. So if you have a look at what's happening in the banking sector in Zimbabwe, for example, 90% of banking is happening on mobile platforms. So how is the tourism industry and our techies in the space working to create those new platforms? That we've got it there, but how do we bring it together in the tourism space that gives us that same competitive edge that what's happening in other industries like the banking industry? And I think those two areas, the red tape and the innovation, and I think that's where we need to perhaps, you know, start to talk about how we can come closer together in finding solutions in that space.
Okay, thanks.
Moderator, you know, you've been hearing what we are doing, but I'm also to hear what should we be doing in government. So some of the people here in the audience I meet very often in meetings, but there are people here that I never meet in meetings. I probably only see them next year again at this HICA conference. So what I will appreciate is if you just ask 4 or 5 people from the audience, anybody who would like to stand up and say to us here in government, what do you want us to do? What are the 2 or 3 most pressing issues where you work with every day and that we should take cognizance of and that we should give attention to? It will be valuable to us.
Honourable Minister, that's really appreciated, your cue on that. So, yeah, we'd like to, we've got about 15 minutes to hold a direct discussion with the delegates in the audience. So please, if you've got a comment or you've got a question or you've got a suggestion, please put your hand up. Brian Singer, if you can get a... Go ahead, Brian.
Minister van Schalkwyk, I made this point. I'm over here. I made this point earlier before you joined us, but apologies to the rest of the audience for repeating myself. But would it not be feasible for the government to subsidize air tickets into South Africa to attract new visitors? There could be criteria, for example, a minimum of 7 nights stay to ensure that the spend over the trip would more than pay for the subsidy. I would imagine that the ripple effect that would have through the entire economy, not only filling hotels and restaurants, but also creating jobs and employment, and as I say, the ripple effect would be immense. That would be my suggestion, if it was feasible.
Okay, should we take a few more comments, Honourable Minister? Would you like to address that one?
Why don't we take a few questions and my colleagues can come in on the issues that they would also
great.
like to, yes.
Okay, great. We have the lady in the row just behind Brian.
My name's Carla De Silva. I was part of one of the panels. Honourable Minister, I just wanted to ask you, with regards to the budgets that you allocate, as you rightfully said, it's given to South African tourism, and they work with the industry, both public and private, to make sure that ultimately we're investing and we're marketing the country. Is there a performance and evaluation mechanism whereby government looks at what private sector or South African tourism did in terms of allocating those budgets? And do we really look at it and compare it to ultimately your key objectives as government, to say the money was well spent, we got that return on investment, and did we focus on what is so key? For example, the perception, and we've mentioned it, the perception of crime. As South Africans, we know that there is crime, but we are doing something about it, and at times it is exaggerated in the international front. And why I'm saying this is recently the Prime Minister of Mauritius sent a letter through to our government here, and it was sent to DGs, and we have not seen a reply. And it's been 2.5 weeks since that letter arrived. And he was saying that the Mauritians, and not only the Mauritians, but the Chinese traffic and the Indian traffic, coming via Mauritius into southern Africa are concerned about the crime because 7 government officials from Mauritius were attacked following arriving at Artambo when proceeding to Pretoria. So that is a perception that's been created. So I think our marketing funds should be aligned with SAT and the industry to say, let's eliminate this perception about South African crime. That's very, very important, and a united front. So I think the performance and evaluation mechanism is absolutely critical so that ultimately we can see that money is being well spent by the private sector and the public sector.
Okay, shall we take one more and then we can look at that?
Thanks, Thanks Green. Honourable Minister, my name's Ewan Cameron from Lomrel. We have an aircraft in South Africa branded as FastJet. We would like to launch that and have that operating as a true budget domestic airline within South Africa. Is there anything you can do to help us? Because evidently within the hotel space we all identify that aviation has a large role to play with regards to connectivity and enabling domestic and international travellers to navigate around South Africa. FastJet has been very successful in East Africa. It's flying in West Africa. We are anxious to have it flying in South Africa. Is there anything you can do to help?
Okay, thank you. Perhaps if we could, let's deal with these 3 first. One is the subsidized airfare issue. Second one is the budget allocation interrogation, and Ewan's question on the FastJet issue. Perhaps let's deal with those 3 and then see whether we've got time to take more.
I think let's try to be brief in our answers and take another round because it's quite helpful to us to hear what the issues are. First of all, on the issue of subsidies and budgets, I'll just group them all together. You know what? In theory, I think all of us would like something to be subsidized. But let me tell you, from the perspective of government, we have some bad experience of subsidizing certain sectors of the economy. Just think back agriculture, what happened with the whole agriculture subsidy system. So our approach is we would rather invest in developing businesses and skills instead of subsidizing. And that's why we are investing, all the government departments have skills investment, social responsibility investment programs, the training of chefs, the training of sommeliers, the training of this, the training of that, because we believe we should develop skills. Secondly, all of us are investing in developing small businesses, either from departments directly or via the Tourism Enterprise Program or via other mechanisms. We think it's better to assist people to start businesses than subsidize travelers. So that is just, a general approach. Then in terms of do we spend the money wisely? Do we give a mandate to those institutions that market the country? And do we assess them? The answer is absolutely yes. What we do at the beginning of a year, all of us sit down with these boards and we give them a mandate for the year ahead. And those mandates is, for instance, I'll be quite upfront with you. I had quite a debate with the private sector when I wanted to take some of our money away from some of the traditional markets and invest them in China and India. And some of the people in the private sector said to me, but you must be mad. These markets will take many, many years before we will get any return. Let's keep our money in country X, A, and Z, European countries and so on. And I said, I'll make a deal with you. We'll get new and additional money for the new markets, and we'll slow the growth of new investments in some of the traditional markets, because we have a well-developed profile, but we must find the balance between the old markets, which will continue to be important, but the new markets. And then at the end of the year, all of us sit down with these institutions and we ask them, so tell us, what did you invest in country A? What was the return on our money? Can I tell you, let me say government broadly, the tourism money that all of us invest in marketing this country is one of the best investments that we are making as a country. We get just the best return on that money. But I must tell you, every now and then we will sit down with SAT, or I suppose at provincial level, I don't know what our colleagues' response will be, and say to them, you know what, we're not satisfied with the performance in market X. We don't think you've spent our money well enough. What are you going to do to improve, or move it to another market? So that's why earlier in my introduction, I referred to what is now investment markets, in the next year, it will probably be core markets. Then the crime thing. We cannot run away from crime. And we must deal with the issue up front, because there is a perception, and whenever I get this question at any international forum, I deal with it up front. There is this perception. But you know what? We must also be very careful in dealing honestly with the perception that we don't talk our country down, as a government and as an industry, without covering up that there is something that we have to deal with. Now, just in terms of repeat visitors, let me just give you back what visitors to our countries tell us. We do exit interviews with people when they leave the country. You know, a few years ago, until 3 years ago, I think it was 3 years or 4 years ago, crime was the #1 concern that they raised, even when they leave the country. You know what? It's now down to number 6 or 7. So that tells us a story, not what we think, but what people tell us. It doesn't mean there's no problem. I think there is still a challenge that we have to deal with. But we have to deal with that in a very, very balanced way. And let us not think that South Africa is the only... Let me ask you a question, for instance. You know, can you remember when the Dilaogue incident happened? People ask me, so, Minister, what is that going to do to the country? It must have a major impact. It had no impact whatsoever. Do you know why? If I ask one of you today, do you still plan to travel to the United States after what happened in Boston? Of course, many people will stay, we will still travel. So I think in advising people on how they must conduct themselves, that is the key for the private sector. We have a 70% repeat visitor percentage, people coming back, and that tells us the story. Now, on the last issue of the budget airlines, I'm a huge fan of the budget airlines because I think it fulfills a very valuable role. And not only in South Africa, but what is underestimated is the potential role of budget airlines on the African continent. That is what we should be addressing. Now, there is this committee at the Department of Transport. Our department is represented on that committee. We get all the applications, and we look at that and we deal with that. So we're part of that collective taking decisions. So it will be wrong for me to give you specific advice. But what I will be saying to you, you know, internationally in 1994, we just had over, how many airlines had we flying to South Africa? Just over 20 in 1994. It's now around 50. But where we need more competition is on domestic routes in this country. That's where we need more competition. Because even the improved competition that we have now have already driven down prices. But we need more competition, and I think that will obviously be to the benefit of potential travelers here. But my colleagues can deal with some of the other issues.
Well, sure. I think the only matter I wanted just to come in, Minister, to say the issue around subsidizing air ticket. First and foremost, we are correct, Minister, because subsidies by their very nature, they cause distortion in the market. And therefore, you have to be very careful from where we sit as government that we do not unnecessarily cause those distortions. However, I would be saying, Minister, if there is a case that is being put to us, we would need someone to make a proposition that says, number one, how are we going to avert the distortion? Number two, how are we going to ensure that post the subsidization period, we will have a sustainable growth taking place? Because you don't want to develop routes and only to find that once the government has pulled up its own subsidy, those routes are able to collapse. And I think we would need to look at that. And from where we stand as KZN, for instance, we have made a decision that there are certain routes where we're going to have to partner with airlines, but those are not just done on a general basis. We'll look at the markets, and if it goes into the kinds of markets where we think we want to grow and we see that there could be potential for growth, we'll be interested in looking at all of those. But you're not going to do it on a wholesale basis, you do it on a targeted basis.
Okay.
Mr. Winter. Add to that, I mean, we do subsidise in different ways. So, I mean, I think the Minister spoke about skills, etc. I mean, in the Western Cape, we're now putting another 750 million rand into doubling the convention centre size. That's a government spend to create an opportunity to attract more business travellers. We know that that has an add-on effect to the domestic tourism space. It helps our seasonality. So we are investing government funds into that space that really does subsidise tourism. And it's all about choices. So that's a choice that's been made. If there's discussion that says we need to have a look at maybe focusing in different areas, well, we need to have those discussions. I think also, maybe coming in on the question on crime, it's how you deal with it. And I know that we've got special units that are set up, and we actually get together quite regularly as industry players with the local law enforcement units to talk about it. But then it's about how you, when these incidents do happen, how you react and how you turn it around. And I mean, as you heard, the numbers are reducing when we do the exit interviews, but it's how we deal with these issues. And it's those indicators that were spoken about earlier when we saw the presentation, specifically the World Economic Forum numbers. So if our road deaths are high and that's a detractor from attracting tourists, then what are we doing about it? And that's how we influence other departments and the programs that they have, that we spend taxpayers' money in trying to build a much better playing field and a much more attractive area for this business to do what they do.
Yeah, I agree largely